Okay, do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this course is Introduction to Linux, and there is some documentation about Linux at various Swedish HPC centers that you can go and look at later if you want to. And the prerequisites for this course is that you have access to a Linux system. And I hope that all of you have that now. And there's a course project on Tetralit that you can use. So if you don't have another computer where you can run Linux on it, you can always run it there. And there's a get started guide for NSC here for Tetralit is at that center in Linköping. But I'm not going to spend time on logging in there and talking about that because it will take too much time. So anyway, this course aims to give a brief but comprehensive introduction to Linux. I will talk very briefly about Linux terminology. Then I will go to the command line to navigating the file system. We'll take a short look at some editors on the Linux system, which may be different to what you are used to. Talk a bit about data handling, and then a few handy tricks and hints. So it will mainly be lectures and type-alongs, and there is also a few exercises that you can try out yourself. And since it's the first instance of the course, as I said, we have an evaluation survey that we'd be very grateful if you would fill, because then we can see if there's something we should change. And there is some few cluster-specific things to say. The course is given by HPC2N. We have a system called Kebnekaise. We are not going to use that today, but it's done under NAISS, and we're using the NAISS system Tetralit or your own system or any other cluster that you have access to. But I'll just say briefly for Tetralit, this is the login node. And it looks like this when I log in the first time from my computer Defiant. And the verification code it asks about is a two-factor one, and you set that also, and you do that here, and it takes a little while. So, and there's a project storage for the course project, and I am going to log in here to show you how it looks when I do that quickly. And see, then it asks for a verification code, and I'm going to find that here and type it in like that. And then you can see I get logged in. And you get a lot of information here, and often there will be information if there is something with the system. So there is something called message of the day that is often showed here, but in this case, it shows information about your account also in this case, and some help. And it might be good to have this here at least a few first times, but otherwise you can run this command here in order to stop from showing this each time. But an important thing here is it tells you you have this directory, and I can go there. I copy with marking it with my left mouse button, and then I can click with the middle one. And yeah, it's a place I can place my stuff in. And just in a little while, I'm going to copy the material there, but not right now. So I'm logged in here, and this here is my own computer at home. Defiant is the one I use at work, but today I'm working from home. And as you saw in the email I sent, there is an important info page for the course, and it has links to the Q&A page. It has information about how to log in and things like this. There's also a Q&A page. You can use that to ask questions during the lectures if you don't want to be recorded. And in general, it's a good idea to write the questions there because we will then write answers and you can go back and look at it later, and you can also see questions other people asked. And it might be easier to actually remember what was answered than if you just get it during the lecture. So, and then we have a preliminary schedule, and I will try to stick to it as much as possible. And as you can see here, we have the welcome and syllabus, and now we are going to go to the introduction to Linux. And the Linux terminology and command line, file system, editors, data handling, hints and tricks, and the summary, and we should end at 11. So let's go to introduction. First, a reminder to go to this welcome page where the syllabus is. There's either this link, you can also click here on this symbol, or you can click here on this small house. So what do you hope to learn from this? A little bit about what is Linux. Learn something about the command line interface, which is used a lot in Linux, and which may be what you're going to use on any supercomputer that you are going to work with. So many of those also have GUIs, that is graphical user interface. A little bit about navigating the file system, how to see which files are there, change directories and things like this. Data handling, compressing, archiving, and some hints and tricks of Linux. So you may ask, why should I learn to use Linux? Well, most HPC centers, supercomputers, they run some flavor of Linux. It's also a very stable and reliable system, and it's very customizable. It runs on any hardware. There is a strong community, which means there is often answers to things you have questions about. You can find many flavors of Linux operating systems. They are mostly open source and free. There is lots of applications, and it's in general lightweight, so it might run on a computer that is too old or not powerful enough to run newer Windows versions, for instance. So what is Linux? Linux is a family of open source Unix-like operating systems. And it's based on the Linux kernel, which was first released in 1991 by Linus Torvalds. An operating system is a software that sits underneath all other software on a computer. It manages the computer's hardware, like CPUs, GPUs, memory, etc. And it also takes care of connections between other software and the hardware. And usually Linux is packaged as a Linux distribution, or distro as it's often called, that includes a kernel and supporting system software and libraries. And many of these are often provided with by something called the GNU projects, and it's a open source project. So, and there are many different Linux distributions or distros. When you look at it online, they will often call it distros. Some common ones are Ubuntu, which is run on many of the supercomputing centers. There's also Debian, Fedora, Gentoo, and many others. And most of them are free and open source, but you can also find commercial ones like Red Hat Enterprise and SUSE. And desktop Linux distribution often, at least mostly, include a desktop environment. You can get some that are only command line, but the most will have some installed, or you can install them yourself. GNOME and Mate are similar and very common, as is KDE Plasma, XFCE, and Unity. There's then a window manager together with applications are responsible for most of what you see. And I have tried to make a drawing here of how things go together. So you sit here as a user and you use a graphical interface. There's a display server and a window manager, and those work together to give you what you see here. Below that is the kernel, and below that again the hardware. So So this is one way of seeing it, and you can also here see when you are Googling for something, you can see the desktop environments, some examples of those, and some examples of display servers and things. And those things you probably will not have to think about unless you start installing Linux and tampering with it a lot yourself, because most of that is handled in the distros. You should usually just choose a desktop environment. So the use of Linux on desktop is probably only 2-3%, but most of the web servers, that's more than 96%, and most mobile devices, Android for instance, run something Linux based. And all the supercomputers on the top 500 list run Linux. And there is a lot of information that I've gathered here. These pages are quite good. They have some Linux guides and some easy examples that you can follow. So I will move to the Linux terminology. And I will not go through all of this. I only have gathered this here because if you look at something online, it might be good to actually know what these terms mean. And I do recommend that you read through this, and there is also more terms down here that you can find information about. But just very briefly, as I said, Linux, we think of it as an operating system, but it's actually an open source kernel, so it's only part of an operating system. The distros themselves are the operating systems. Kernels are at the core of every operating system. And the kernel manages the hardware as well as the programs on your computer. Think of if you press a key or you use your mouse, move around like this, that information gets sent through to the kernel. It will then communicate with the operating system and use the data as input to show the output using the hardware, and that is in this case the monitor. The base Linux kernel is open source, but some of the distros are not. But most of the distros use the core, and they modify it to different extents depending on what they want to achieve. So you can pick and choose something that you like. So what are distros? Well, that is just different versions of Linux that are called distros or distributions. And some of them are easier to use than others. Some of the easy ones are Ubuntu and Debian, also Mint. Some that might be harder are Gentoo and Arch, but it all depends on what you like and what you do. So most of these distros can be downloaded, put on a bootable USB, and then you can try them out before deciding. So you can make a live USB stick and use that to test things. And the reason for that they are called Linux distributions is that it comes from that you are sharing or distributing the Linux OS usually for free. That is why they named it this way. Aside from distributions, there are also what is called customized versions that you call remixes, flavors, and spins, but that is not so important now. But there are an example, which is that Ubuntu, the system that is run on many of the supercomputers, has several flavors. And that depends on which different desktop environment it is in these cases. So it's, for instance, Kubuntu is using KDE Plasma and things like this. And if you look at Fedora, Linux uses the expression spins for its derivatives, whereas Ubuntu calls it flavors. So it's simply different. Desktop environment is one thing you might have run across, because when you run something on your own Linux computer, or if you run it on one of the supercomputers, if you, for instance, run ThinLink, there will be a desktop environment that you log into, and On many of them, it's GNOME, or rather something similar to GNOME, which is called Mate. That is what it is on Kebnekaise. On Tetralit, it is XFCE, but you also can install other things if you want to. But yeah, those are probably the two that you will run across if you are using the thin links. And I think I'm not going to talk more about terminology, but I do want to say that I think you should read through this, because if you are reading something online, you might wonder what some term actually means. And I have tried to explain at least a large number of the more common terms here. But since we only have a short course this time, I'm not going to go deeper into this. So let's instead